So, want to welcome everybody who's coming in for our midweek program, including a guest for our gardening conversations, Tony Avent. Want to make sure everybody knows that while we're chatting, they are more than free. They are in fact encouraged to use their phone or their iPad or whatever and go to jcra.ncsu.edu or jlbg.org and click on the Give button. We have had a $500,000 pledge gift to JLBG today, for Juniper Level Botanic Garden for the endowment. I don't know about other gifts right now. I know, wait, I'm getting a report.
$2,000 from about 15 people for JLBG.
So we've had a couple thousand more dollars going into that endowment. I really would encourage people to take this time while we're talking. You're going to hear a little bit about why it's important to do that coming up. Let me see. I had ours bookmarked, but I think I lost out on it. But
Your mom. Yep.
Hey, my mom has given. Thank you, Mom.
Thank you, Mom.
So I appreciate that. Oh yeah, we've got businesses, professional care, heating and air, like that. Rick Lawn, the executive director of the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association, and also a board member. So really been successful, and we're trying to get up to 210 gifts between our organizations to really have our board match us with a challenge grant of $25,000. So Tony, thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing some of what's going on at Juniper Level with folks today. We've had some of the people you've influenced over the years today. We talked to Rich Olson earlier, and as Todd Lassane gave a gift, and we talked about Ian Simpkins, and what's been your experience with students out there, whether interns or working for you over the years from NC State in the garden?
Well, it's been great to have so many through the years, and obviously, as you've mentioned, some same ones that interned with us. They've gone on to do amazing things. So it is we're training those leaders of tomorrow, and that's one of the critical things about the work that we do here and the work that y'all do is getting those people to understand it is about the plants and then go on and do amazing things. So yeah, it's.
Well, one of the first people that I got to know pretty well, who had worked with you. I didn't realize it at the time, actually. And this what I'm talking about ties in with kind of your philosophy, bridging the gap between horticulture and botany, because a lot of times those disciplines don't speak to each other. Is Ron Galliardo.
He's one of our very first employees.
Yeah, you can talk a little bit about what he has done in recent years before he retired.
Well, Ron was very interesting. We first met him as a young teenager living in Raleigh, and he exhibited plants when I worked at the fair, so I knew him from that. And he was the first person to ever successfully tissue culture Venus flytraps and Sarracenias. So it was pretty amazing. So I knew him, and then was able to later hire him as our first employee before he got a real job at Atlanta Botanic Garden, and he developed there the tissue culture protocols for trilliums and did amazing work in conservation. So that's sort of where we are now, is trying to take some of that work that Ron did in developing that in our own lab and get a lot of these rare plants, especially a lot of the rare natives, and get them propagated and get them out there. And then obviously he went on to pretty much plant the Amazon spheres, select all the plant material and oversee that development. So yeah, we've had some amazing people go through the nursery through the years.
Well, and the reason Ron comes to mind when I think about that bridging the gap between horticulture and botany is because I tried to, I nominated him for outstanding graduate in horticulture.
He didn't graduate in hort.
He was a botany student. So we couldn't, but you taught him well because he's retired and neither one of us are.
He's working for Amazon's a little different than working for the state or working for yourself.
But that is important. So this is something that people don't talk about or don't understand is why can't I get that plant? Tony, if those who don't know, Plant Delight's Nursery offers one of the biggest selections of native plants around. One of the biggest selections of non-native plants as well. But people often say, why can't I get this native plant? Or they say there's 3,000 native plants in North Carolina, and say, yeah, but half of those are ugly and the other half are darn near impossible to grow or propagate. And that stops a lot of people. That has not necessarily stopped you, though.
No, well, most nurseries are going to propagate easy to propagate stuff. So if you look at nurseries, they pretty much all offer the same easy to propagate or easy to buy in plants. And we sort of are known for taking the road less traveled. And we said, let's figure out how to do it. So as we talked about in the Trillium video we showed earlier, that's a 4 to 5 year crop. You can't, without having some income coming in from somewhere else, you can't do that. So we had to develop the catchword now, a sustainable model that would allow us to propagate these rare and endangered plants. I mean, we offer a lot of orchids, a lot of lady slipper orchids. They're 8 years from the time they're started to seed to what we sell. We've got a cooperator we work with in Germany that is actually growing the seedlings, and then they ship them over to us, and then we're able to pot those and offer them. So, so many of these things that just aren't available. And, what's interesting, the rarer a plant is, especially natives, the less likely anybody is to get it, because you've got a lot of institutions that believe that if a plant's rare, they should keep it out of the hands of the general public. You can find countless articles online of, oh my goodness, we did a search and we found that nurseries are actually offering endangered plants. We must put a stop to this. How horrible. It's because some people have anointed themselves in charge of the world's germplasms. And those of us with unwashed hands are not suitable to be able to grow those. And certainly, how dare us share those? We might contaminate the germplasm. We might mix a population of Virginia genes with the population of North Carolina genes. But the question I asked them, I said, well, what if we held the same thing about humans? What if we said humans should not marry and produce children outside of your own population? We should be genetically isolated. Really? How would that go over if it were humans? I don't think it would go over particularly well.
Well, and like we always try and emphasize here, there's black and white thinking is useless because the world is not black and white. It's gray. It is great that there are people doing conservation work and protecting plants in the wild. I think we both agree with that.
Well, I was on the North Carolina Rare Plant Conservation Committee for 8 years. So yes, we are absolutely in agreement.
But that doesn't mean then that's the end. And Tony and I, we talk about our collaborations with Raulston Arboretum and Juniper Level Botanic Garden, programs like Southeastern Plant Symposium we put on jointly. But we also just co-authored a textbook chapter in a textbook. It's actually a 7-volume textbook on the role of botanic gardens in conservation. And we had to argue to write, to have an article included on the role of botanic gardens in conservation through propagation and dissemination, getting these things out, that's important. And I think that's, when we talk about our organizations coming together in an official sense, I think there's always been that close alignment. That's one of the keys, is getting those plants out. We can grow lots of plants, and we're plant nerds. We like to grow lots of plants, but it's the sharing of the plants that is the important part. Studying them, learning about them, and then bringing them out. And it's unfortunately becoming a harder and harder to do that, and we fight harder and harder to be able to continue to do that.
Well, it is. I think a lot of people still live under the myth that plants grow in the wild where they grow their best, and they simply do not. That is, they grow in the wild where they will persist without human intervention and without competition. But if anybody's ever been over to see the great gardens of Europe, especially get in Germany, our native trilliums are 5 to 10 times as vigorous and as large as they are here in their native habitat. They grow far better over there. So it's really quite embarrassing to those who keep perpetuating this myth of native plants must grow here and they must grow in this. And, we have a little plant in the garden that's a Chinese native, Chinese endemic, very rare. It's called Europhysa henryi. It's only native to a particular alkaline crevice. And I read an article by the Chinese researchers that said, absolutely impossible to grow this plant outside of its native environment. We have tried, it absolutely cannot be grown. It's growing fine. We've had the thing in for a couple of years. It's been blooming since January. So what we always say is never send a botanist to do a horticulturist job.
Right. And it's, and I think, I agree, but those field botanists, and that's where I think we, that Juniper Level and Raulston Arboretum, we get people excited, students especially, these interns, about plants and tell the stories behind them. And it really takes knowing those plants and seeing those plants growing and living to really know about them. There are things that botanists say is the same plant that they sure aren't the same thing in the garden. You know, that one dies, one lives, one grows 3 feet tall, the other one grows, creeps on the ground like a ground cover. And we could go on and on about those. And so it is important, not just from the conservation, but from the study point of view, to have these plants and be able to see them. Absolutely.
I mean, we're very blessed to have two of the most incredible botanists I've ever met on staff. Patrick McMillan did a video today, and Zach Hill, our plant records and taxonomists, both of them are incredible. We were actually in the field for several hours yesterday. They know plants, native plants especially, far greater than I will ever know. And it's just fascinating to learn from them. And then we can take those plants and then evaluate them as garden specimens and then grow those. I mean, we've done, I think of our 100 trips we've done worldwide, probably 70 of those have been in the U.S. because there's an incredible amount of plants that we still don't know. I mean, we've published new species. We currently grow 10 trillium species that have yet to be named and described from the Southeast U.S. That's crazy. So it takes that work, as we mentioned, of botany and horticulture working together for the good of everyone.
So for those who haven't been to Juniper Level Botanic Garden, it is one of the great plant collections. It is, as I always say, the key for a botanic garden as opposed to a garden, a garden is records. You have to know what's there. Some gardens have the ability to do a lot with those records, research and work. Some gardens don't. But if you don't have the records, then the collection becomes not useless, but very much less useful scientifically. Juniper Level has better records than almost any botanic garden, other botanic garden out there. What inspired you to start that way? Because I've worked with a lot of people who have great gardens, great collections, but they don't even think about records until.
Well, it comes from being an OCD person, and when you're OCD, you have to over-organize everything. So from the time we started, we recorded where everything came from, the date it was planted, where it came from, was wild collected with the data. So we've been doing that since 1986, and our records have continued to improve. Currently, we have now topped 85,000 plant records. So we have grown 85,000 taxa in the garden. We don't have that many alive. We've killed well off north of 50,000. So I think we've probably got the record now for having killed the most plants of any living person.
That's an impressive thing, and it's something important for gardeners to know. Always hound on this. Gardeners kill plants. Gardening's all about experimenting and trying, and sometimes the plants just don't want to grow. Sometimes we grow things that we shouldn't grow. Not that we shouldn't grow, that we know we're not going to grow.
Well, the key is to learn. I mean, JC had told me about Romney coulteri, the California poppy, and he said this is completely ungrowable in the East. Well, you might as well throw them down the gauntlet. I mean, you tell me, here's my mentor telling me I can't grow something. Damn it, I'm going to figure out how to grow it. I killed 15 of them before I finally got it in the right spot. And then it actually grew so bigger, we had to dig it out with a wheelbarrow because it was growing too well. So, yeah, the key is never give up. You know, as Jim Favano said, no matter what it's about, don't give up. Always try something different. And horticulture is a great thing to try this, but it's not we don't look at it as failure. We look at it as learning experience. All right, I've learned something else that didn't work.
Yep. Best gardeners have the best compost because they killed the most plants.
We bury our mistakes.
I like it. Actually, with compost, I always say that the best gardeners have the most interesting things growing out of their compost. We've got some cool things and some plants that I've pulled out of other people's compost. Juniper Level already has the basis for what any of the great botanic gardens would be. When did you really think in terms of the J.C. Raulston, NC State as being a place that could continue the legacy on beyond you and start thinking about how do we continue to fund it after the nursery, after you? What does that look like? And
it's probably been about 8 years ago we started the discussions, but actually JCRA has been in our will for the Arboretum for 30 years. We just never told anyone. That was going to be a nice surprise if something were to happen to us. So 8 years ago, we started looking at all kinds of options. We looked at, all right, can we set up our own foundation? And then we sat down with Sonia Murphy's now the assistant dean, and we started talking about what would it look like. And she was like, have you thought about letting us set it up through the Ag Foundation? And we're like, no, we hadn't. Tell us something about that. And then we talked, and it was like, well, we've always thought of JCRA as a sister. And so we just basically, over the next couple of years, we had to go, obviously, to the university and say, would you be interested in the Botanic Garden? And they said, after we got it high enough on the totem pole, absolutely, we'd be interested, but we have no money. But we have a foundation. So we'll set you up an endowment in the 501c3 in the foundation, and we'll give you a hat that says fundraiser, and your job is to go out there and fundraise money. So that's sort of how it all came together. So it was really meant to be. We just now have to figure out how to get to our $17 million goal, which will fund the operational endowment and make that sustainable. So we're on our way. We've got a ways to go, but
yeah. Well, so something one of the fundraisers said was, now the only trouble you'll have is figuring out how to get people who know and love you because you're a nursery to give money so that you can shut the nursery down and be a garden. And, we I think both realize that, one, that would be difficult, and two, that would defeat much of the purpose of why both of these institutions exist, which is to distribute those plants. And so I want to tell anybody who is concerned that their gift to the endowment for Juniper Level Botanic Garden will mean plants will stop flowing out. That is not the case. What it means is that there may be some different models, and for members, as membership gets started, there'll be some perhaps some exclusive opportunities, but it will also mean once that endowment is filled that you'll be able to think even more about those trilliums that take 4 or 5 years, or those orchids that take 8 years. That it's the business model is not that the nursery is successful so that the garden can be successful. The model becomes the garden is successful, which means you can offer plants that really need to be out, even if it doesn't really make sense, wouldn't make sense even now from a business model.
Sure. I mean, the model we currently have is only successful because I work really cheap and I work 3 40-hour weeks. So when something happens to me, we have to replace me with 3 people that make a lot more money. So that's why we have to have that endowment to make sure we can pay those 3 people. Yeah, I can make it skate by now. I just, work some extra hours, sleep less. But once I'm, become disabled, then yeah, we've got to have those people. So that's why the endowment is critical.
And I believe we're over $1 million with the endowment, with certainly with this planned this pledge of $500,000 that came through today. And as I've said earlier, we're talking about it as though they're 2 separate things contributing to the JLBG endowment. You can do that today. You can contribute to the J.C. Raulston Arboretum General Fund. But when you're contributing to the Juniper Level endowment, that is a gift to the J.C. Raulston Arboretum because that endowment is there to fund the operations of Juniper Level, which is already and will be more in a very real sense part of the J.C. Raulston Arboretum, whatever that be, the gardens of North Carolina State University as a whole. So it is a gift to both of us. So it's not a separate thing. So I really hope people are looking at giving. As we've learned from politics, which we won't get into, those small gifts add up to a lot. So I really encourage people. $10, $25, that 100+ people who've given to the JCRA General Fund, go back in there to the Juniper Level and chip in 25, 50, 25,000, whatever spare change you have.
We say we need 1 million people at $17 and we're there.
Yeah, 1 million people, $17. So we probably only got 750,000 watching us right now, so we may need to go a little bit. We'll still have to work, but I agree, and I think that work that's being done, the idea that it's about teaching. We talk about who's gone through the Juniper Level. Todd Lassane, who's director of the Bellingrath Gardens. Got I don't know. We got Rodney Eason, who's up at I can't remember the name of it, in Maine. Used to be director there.
Mount Desert.
Yeah, Mount Desert. Who else?
Rich Olson.
Rich Olson, who we talked to
today.
Yep.
You talked about Ian Simpkins down at in Florida, and I visited his garden last year. So there's probably more than I'm, and certainly people that work with us, Adrian Rothling, that now is the director at the Senior Garden here in North Carolina. John Rothling, this is the horticulture director up at Old Salem. So there's a lot of people that have gone through the doors, really amazing folks.
Right, and it seems to be, it's the people who are really interested in plants, and then it's, the Arboretum and Juniper Level are where they cut their teeth and got inspired and learned.
And local celebrities. I mean, Brie Arthur was our propagator. Preston Montague was our weekend waterer. So there's
Tim Alderton.
Tim Alderton started with us. We brought him down out of Penn State. So
not me. I applied for a job there at one point. It'd be I can't remember how long ago that was. That must have been ages and ages ago, but I didn't get hired.
Their loss.
Their loss, but it turned out okay, I suppose. But I mean, it's that's a real legacy, and I see that continuing. We bring interns out every summer, and that's what we're raising a lot of money for, is our interns today. We bring them out because there's the botany, there's the conservation, there's just the gardening itself. There's the innovation with, now we'll be showing them the tissue culture lab and what you're doing with that. But it's also the business side, which is really important because, real nuts and bolts business, especially in something as idiosyncratic as the nursery business, you need some real talk, because there's a lot of theory that's taught, but then also communication. How do you get that out? I mean, you're writing a blog post every day, which boggles my mind how you do that. The catalog. We talked about this with Rich Olson, with JC. It wasn't just that he had all this knowledge; he was able to communicate in a way that stuck in people's minds. That humor with passion.
Yeah, his newsletters were incredible. I mean, I remember waiting for each one. So that's one of the reasons we do things like the daily blog from the garden. Is yes, it is about communication. It's not just doing it, because if it's done in a vacuum, nobody benefits and nobody can build on that information. So we every day, people that don't know, go to jlbg.org and click on the blog. And we've been doing them every day now for almost 2.5 years, which is pretty scary when you think about it. But there's so much going on when you have that many plants. It's always a neat story and something to share with people.
And that's, I think, communicating that is always fascinating, because that brings those plants a little bit closer to home. I know earlier you talked about the number of plants that you have introduced, a pretty phenomenal number. What are some of your favorite releases?
Oh, that'd be like asking a politician what's his favorite constituent. The one I'm standing beside right then. It's with so many, it's hard to put one out. Probably our most famous in terms of getting out everywhere is the Lycium Florida Sunshine. When you see one of your introductions at the box stores, i.e. Lowe's, for sale, then you know that plant has arrived.
For sure. And the garden's collections are widely used as resources.
Yeah, people don't realize that a pretty significant number of all the proven winners perennials started with genetics from JLBG. So we share with breeders literally all over the world to take those plants and make them even more commercial, shall we say. I'm not going to say better, but commercial. Breeders, so many breeders use the same genetics everybody else has used. But where you get the real breakthroughs is with bringing in new genetics that nobody has used from the wild, and then your stuff starts to look different. And that's why a lot of the stuff we work with Walter's Gardens, Hans Hansen there, that breeds all the PW perennials, and they're down every single year and take back loads of stuff for their breeding efforts. So it's, the plant preservation is important both from a species point of view, but also from a creating better plants for gardeners point of view. So there's so many reasons, and the things that we don't talk a lot about, that people have no idea, that when they go to the box stores and they see those plants, that the majority of them came from genetics from our gardens. So
right.
Yeah, I guess we don't do a good enough job marketing that.
Well, some of that is it's hard to explain that, because plants just appear in colorful containers at stores, and it takes a long time between one and the other. It may be years from
Many years.
the times it's collected and finally grown and gotten into the hands of the right people, which is always the key, is getting it in the hands of the right people. And one of the ways is, it was actually amazing. One of our former interns who was here talking earlier, Hunter Casey, who is about as introverted as you can be, said that one of the things he learned here was you have to make connections. You know, the dirty word networking, but but you know, the number of times I've reached out to you or passed somebody else on to you, said somebody's looking for somebody who knows a lot about X, and you say, oh yeah, I know a guy, and it goes to them. Or, hey, have you seen this? Just today I saw on Facebook somebody had tagged me in a post about a new plant that was just described from Vietnam, and said kind of laughingly, next time you go, why don't you look at that? And I looked at the article and I said, oh, one of those authors is one of the people I'm going to be with. Okay. You know, so it's those connections are important, and it's professionals, it's homeowners, it's everybody, and that's critical, because the network you have is where you get a lot of those plants.
Well, probably the best story is years ago I read a number of articles through our Rock Garden Society journal about a guy in Massachusetts, a homeowner that was breeding alliums. And I started writing to him and established a connection. You know, I'm really interested in your stuff. We've got a little small nursery started. I'm very interested. So finally he says, I've got two that I'm ready to introduce, and I don't have any way to introduce them. So I'm going to send them to you. And one of them, if you'll introduce in the year 2000, I want you to name it Millennium. I said, okay, we can do that. So we grew it out, introduced it for him. So fast forward, well over a decade later, Walter's Gardens was down, and they said, we're looking to add an allium to our catalog. Do you have one you recommend? I said, as a matter of fact, I do. It's called Millennium. And I sent him back with, I think, 2 plants. And then 5 years later, I went up there, visited their fields. There was 250,000 plants of that allium in their field. And that next year, it became the Perennial Plant Association Plant of the Year. So without networking, that plant may not have ever seen the light of day. And now gardens, literally millions of those plants are in gardens around the world.
And it's still a great plant. I love that plant. I know there's some, and really for a lot of people that opened their eyes about alliums, how good they could be, and has led to some great new introductions from them, but that Millennium is still, I remember the first time I saw it, it absolutely blew my mind.
So but it's an amazing story, but that's how those connections really do matter.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So, you know, you have a lot of history at the Arboretum. I asked Rich this, which you got a story about JC that comes to mind when you walk through the gardens that you can share in polite company, because our company is very polite?
Probably one that always comes to mind is when I was curating the Lath House. This is back in the late 80s, probably late 80s. The Arboretum had a really bad rat problem, like horribly bad. I mean, if you've seen the movie Ben with Michael Jackson, they were big rats. These were not little rats, and we had they were the pet of the Arboretum. And so out in front of the Lath House, I put out a sign, watch rat crossing. And that did not go over well with JC and some of the university brass. They were sort of embarrassed, but they should have been embarrassed. Not JC, but the university should have been embarrassed that they had let the problem get that big. But within a short time, the rats had disappeared. So, that's the one I'll probably never forget. I don't think you've heard that one before.
I had not heard that one before. That's interesting. I might not have been real thrilled with that either if I had been here.
I can imagine not.
But I probably would have started thinking about doing something about the rats.
Yeah, it did what we wanted to do. It forced people's hands to action. But you know what also is interesting? Back then when I was working at the Lath House, they would close half the Arboretum every single, I can't remember if it was Wednesday we were here, because they had to spray. They basically nuked the entire Arboretum with horrible toxic chemicals. I mean, every single week. And we were just, you were hoping the wind did not blow that direction because it was just nasty. So it's been really neat just to have watched the Arboretum after that time really move away from those horrible toxic sprays. I mean, with the big power sprayer, they were just hosing everything down with chemicals. So it's a much nicer place than it used to be.
Well, there's a big difference. The ag tech way of thinking at one point was, better living through chemistry for sure. It was,
spray first, ask questions later.
Right. All right. So something that Greg and I have been doing some today is kind of thumbs up, thumbs downs with plants. So is there a plant that comes to mind? I know you're a plant lover, equal opportunity for all. A plant that is in the market at some, decent level that you would not mind if it was not sold anymore for another decade or so, and let it move out of. I'm being polite there with that. But.
Well, so many plants is right plant, right place. I mean, probably my least favorite plant that comes to mind immediately would be Ligustrum sinense. Just not a plant I would ever plant. If you spend a lot of time in the wild, as I do, it's really far too prevalent out in truly undisturbed habitats. It rarely chokes anything out. It makes it really a bear to get in. So that would probably be the one that I have a problem with commercially now.
I would put the thumbs down on that one too. I think that one's a pretty easy one. Anything with that's going to be a hot take on a plant that's out there that you just.
Well, one of the problem plants I see are the lacebark elms, which I absolutely love, but they are one of the worst cedars we have in the entire garden, and those have been planted all around the country in massive numbers, and I think that's going to be our next big problem. I mean, Bradford pears, obviously, they look great when in bloom. They look terrible when they split apart and fall on your house, and then they seeding into. I haven't seen them seeding into natural areas. I've seen them seeding into disturbed areas, but certainly not a plant I would plant.
Yeah, well, in some of those areas, the disturbed areas, I agree, but not recently disturbed. You don't see Paulownia growing in the middle of an old field, and you do see that with Bradford pears, with Callery pears. So for sure with that one. What have been recent years some of your big surprises in the garden that with plants that you think really could have mass market appeal if people knew about them and could pronounce their names?
Oh wow, that's a hard one. I mean, certainly the allium would be one that we thought had really good potential. We've got a pycnanthemum we introduced called Campbell Carpet. It's one of our selections out of Alabama. That's absolutely incredible. That's the finest selection of Pycnanthemum tenuifolium that we've ever seen. And I think as we move more towards the idea of green mulches, I think that plant's really going to catch on and do pretty amazing things. Oh my goodness.
Well, we had Denacia Seth Carley, the pollinator researcher and expert here. And, I know that I hear often that one of the finest pollinator plants out there for a variety of solitary bees and other insects is Pycnanthemum or mountain mint, which has a mint adjacent fragrance I've had to rip out early in my career about a quarter acre of it, and it makes me absolutely ill, the smell of it. But other people find it delightful. But
they're runners and they're clumpers. And the key is not get one of these that's going to run. And my first experience with mountain mint, I went out and planted it in the morning. When I came back from lunch, it didn't run in my neighbor's yard. I mean, that had to go. I have no interest in those. That's fine in natural areas, but they're really good garden specimens, and that's the key, is to grow those. Probably one of the genera that we're doing a lot of work with are asparagus ferns. And I don't think people have any idea. It's slow to catch on, which is odd, because people grow asparagus ferns to eat. They grow asparagus ferns and hang in baskets. But the ones in terms of perennials in their garden, they just haven't somehow made that leap, which is fascinating.
And they are beautiful plants.
Yeah, texturally they're incredible.
They're tough as nails. Yeah. Some of them get great fall color. I grew up thinking that asparagus, the edible asparagus, which is what we're talking about, the edible asparagus had to be grown in a 4x4 or 8x8 bed made of creosote railroad ties. That was the only way to grow it. First time I saw somebody growing it in a perennial border where they go in and harvest some at the beginning of the season and then let it grow up and be this beautiful textural accent. Behind there was that was a real shocker for me. But I think you're absolutely right with those asparagus ferns. There are ones that are like little glossy shrubs. There are long vines. There are and boy.
It was interesting the other day when I was mentioning to someone that now all of our favorite plants are now in the asparagus family. Didn't used to be. So not only asparagus, agaves, yuccas are now in the asparagus family. Hostas are in the asparagus family. Solomon seals are now in the asparagus family. We can go on and on. But it's like everything we collect is now in one family. So I thought that was pretty fascinating.
It is. And, the taxonomist got to stay in business. It all makes sense. Okay. All right. I'm going to ask you about a couple of plants.
Okay.
Encore azaleas.
Okay. What about them?
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Oh, I think it's great that we've got azaleas that now bloom. We've grown the parent species for years, and you and I were together in Taiwan when we saw it growing on the cliffs. So no, that's a great example of how someone with foresight, Buddy Lee, saw this plant and said, this thing grows, but we can refine it down. And I think it's absolutely amazing. So that's definitely a thumbs up.
Do you know anybody who has done any work with our native deciduous azaleas? We've got very late blooming species like Rhododendron prunifolium, the plum leaf azalea that's midsummer or later in some selections, and our very early flowering other native selections. Is anybody, anybody who's looking into that?
The Azalea Society people have done a lot of work with that. There's several now selections that flower in August that use the prunifolium. And just the natives, the breeder that comes to mind is John Thornton down in the Gulf Coast. John did amazing work. And for those that are not familiar with him, probably 20 years ago, I was on a program for the Rhododendron Society up in Virginia. And I'm just sitting there doing my thing, waiting for all the other speakers to finish. And this guy comes up and he's talking about growing rhododendrons. And I just sort of wasn't listening because I've killed all these rhododendrons. And he started talking about breeding them at his garden down on the Gulf Coast, breeding them in wet mud in an area that gets 60 to 80 inches of rain a year. And so my ears perked up. And I was like, all right, how's he doing this? And it turns out he had discovered that rhododendron hyperetherum, and anything you breed with that, did incredible. And so we started buying some of his selections, and they're absolutely amazing. So between him doing the evergreen rhododendrons and Dr. Aromi, who did incredible work with the deciduous azaleas, for people that have not grown Aromi azaleas, you have missed it. We've got plants in our garden now that are 8 foot tall, 6 to 8 foot across that are just a mass of flowers in the spring. You've got the yellows, the reds, the oranges, the peachy colors.
They are, it's literally when they're flowering, it's like walking into one of those big specialty candy stores where everything is just bright colors. It really is. And I think that's, having all that where people can see it at Juniper Level is important. So Juniper Level is not open all the time yet. That's where I think we both want to be. That's the building. When's the next open gardens day?
Open days are the last weekend in April, first weekend in May. It's Friday through Sunday. Love to have people come down, see the gardens. All our staff will be out to chat and answer questions.
Yeah. So I said this earlier, but it is the only garden that my wife has gone to and was absolutely blown away by the garden itself. She generally tolerates gardens with me, but actually she generally, when we take a vacation, she will drop me off at a garden because I do like to enjoy gardens alone. And she went out and without me, and maybe that was the secret. It was without me, but she was absolutely blown away. And I've talked to people over and over who said, I was out there and I just said hi to Tony, and he started talking to me, and he showed me this and took his time out, and there's all these people around. So I do encourage you, one, give to the JLBG, Juniper Level Botanic Garden Endowment, but also, when you go out for those open garden days, say hi to Tony. He's out there. He's makes himself available to everybody, and I really likes meeting the people that are out there enjoying the garden, just like we do here.